Howdy folks, Shell Presto here. Awesome artist, remarkable writer, and undaunted luminary of her time. October's been hitting me pretty hard. I started off with a funeral, then my toddler got a pretty nasty cold. And most mothers will tell you, you just don't get much done when your kid is sick. And as perfectly expected, I also caught the cold my son has. So, yeah. Got knocked down a couple times during this Inktober. But we're going to get back up. So, I'm going to keep working on this and answering your questions as well. So, Nephtalie, and I apologize if I pronounce that wrong, has asked, I was wondering if there's something similar to Artist Talk for comic creators. And she clarified to say that she means how artists give talks to groups of people, like at galleries and events, etc. So Nephtalie is interested in getting her word out about her work in person. So the answer to that is yes. It just depends on who you want your audience to be, where you're going, or who you're hoping to speak to, and quite frankly, the personal opinions of the people running organizations in your area. That's all a lot of ifs, but unfortunately, everything in life is chock full of ifs, so it's what we got. Now, if you're a comic book artist, probably the best place to, well, here's the catch. You don't want to just go somewhere and talk about your book or your work, obviously. Unless you're really, really popular already, then you can do that. But usually you want to try to present useful information to people that want to know that information. Because otherwise you're essentially just giving them a commercial for your work, and since people don't already care about your work, and I'm assuming they don't. I'm assuming most people watching this channel are on the newer end of making comics. I could be wrong. It would be awesome if people that are already in the industry, well, I guess, alright, there's at least one person who's already in the industry that watches my channel, because I know Comic Book Black Belt stops by here every once in a while. But I'm assuming most people are looking to market something new that people don't know about, and it's not that your work isn't good quality work or even fantastic quality work, and people don't care about it. The simple fact of the matter is that when something is new and unfamiliar to people, they tend to not care about it. And I'm not saying that Nephtalie is looking to just talk about her books at places. That's me saying to anyone who may be interested in doing this sort of thing. that you can't just go somewhere and think people are going to want to hear about your books. Unfortunately, life just doesn't work out that way. So you need to present on a topic that people are going to care about. Quite frankly, that's what I try to do with these videos. I would love if everyone who watched these videos would... I don't really want to move this because it's my model for something, but we're going to move it just so people can see. I do illustrated heroic adventure novels with my husband. I would love it if everyone ran out and got a copy of Martian War Chronicles, Population of Loss, or any of my other books. But I don't expect you folks to realistically just yet because, you know, who am I? So what I do is I try to talk on topics that I think people would find interesting, like this. And hopefully I'll convince you folks that I have talent and good taste, and you might run out and buy some of my books. So, number one, try to figure out what you are good at that other people may not be good at yet. And prepare to give a talk on that. If you're a comic artist, that could be on one of the steps of self-publishing. It could be on finding a publisher, or if you make your comics yourself, the good old-fashioned print and staple kind of way, how to do that. You could do it on telling a story through pictures, or communicating a story through pictures. Or you can even do it on something like, I don't know, the seriousness of the art form. Most people give, I'll give the one I've read. Most people give Maus, M-A-U-S, as an example of serious comic storytelling. And it's an excellent comic. It's part biography, part autobiography, about the what the Jews went through in Europe in World War II. It's an excellent book, but you can also talk about other people's comics and relate it back to your own work. The key, though, is that you have to appeal to people with something other than just your own work. So let's say you've got some ideas for topics that you think are interesting. Now the question is, where can you talk? Well, you've got options. I'm just trying to avoid tangents here. I don't want the line of the vest to line up with her nose, because that's going to look real funny. Alright, so where can you find places to talk about these things? And I just realized that there should be another hand here, and that I already inked that. Oh, that's fun. Okay. Shell Presto, batting 1,000. All right, so where can you find places to talk? The obvious one is you can talk to your local comic stores and see if they could put out, if they'd let you have a table there and give a talk and put out a flyer to see if people that like comics would like to come and hear you talk and learn a bit about, self-publishing their own. Lots of people that read comics want to make their own comics, so that ain't a bad place to start looking. Obviously, different comic stores have different owners. Different owners have different opinions. Some may be up for it, some won't. But I've found most comic book store owners are pretty friendly. Now, I have never personally tried to get an event. My cat is under my chair. I was not expecting that. Now, most comic book store owners, I should say, I've never personally tried to have an event or give a talk or anything at a comic shop, and a lot of comic shops don't necessarily have you hold an event. They just like have an event or have a talk or anything like that. Some comic shops aren't set up with room for that. As a matter of fact, I think you'd have to find like one of the comic shops that have a gaming section, so there's even places for people to sit down, because I've been in some comic shops that feel utterly claustrophobic, and I'm sure that giving a talk there wouldn't work. So if you pick the right comic shop, and a comic shop that sort of does events or has done things like that before, you can talk to the comic shop and see what they think. The other thing is some comic shops will just let you have a signing where you sit there and you sign and you talk to people individually, but they might not want to have an event just because indie people don't often draw a lot of they often don't draw a big crowd at comic shops. Unfortunately, a lot of comic shops, the fans, I guess rightfully, are more interested in the old characters, the characters they've always known and loved, Marvel and DC. Well, those books are floundering, so I'm hoping indie comic support picks up, because otherwise there may not be a comics industry soon. So anyway, comic shops is one place you can look. Libraries is another place. Especially if you have a published book that the library can order. And especially if your comic is kid-friendly, libraries are always looking for programs for kids. So they may host you or want to have you talk there. Other places that Nephtalie even suggested galleries. Galleries can be a little hard to get into. You sort of have to network a lot and know the right people, and it's totally doable. You just have to be persistent. I personally am, I don't know, I'm not over fond about galleries, and then you also have to find a gallery that essentially considers comic book art, and they will usually kind of lump you in with children's programming there, so it could work if your comic is kid friendly, but otherwise I honestly just don't know. Now there are essentially things like hybrid galleries. Like we have one in our area, and it's, how to put it, it's an art gallery, and it's a traditional art gallery, but you pay for a membership to be in the to be included in the gallery, and they usually only show one person's work there a month, so you have to be a member for a while to get your stuff shown. But you pay a membership to join, and then on top of that, you have to volunteer to help out at their open houses 3 Saturdays a year. And you're generally also expected to do some other essentially volunteer work for them as well. And then if you're not chosen as a display artist that year, they still hold a couple shows throughout the year where they'll take like 1 or 2 pieces from everyone and put them up in the gallery. And then the particular one that I know then has a classroom where you can have workshops. And you can make money teaching the workshops and stuff like that. But again, they'll want you to talk about what it'll essentially be to teach people. It's a classroom setting, so you need to have some skill you're trying to teach people, but you could make money doing it. I think if you want to teach other people, that could be a really great setup, and you can look and see if there's anything like that in your area. I live in the middle of nowhere, and we have something like that, so I imagine there are a bunch of other places that also have things like that. But personally, I'm not the sort of person where I necessarily want to be teaching people and giving lessons and things like that. But I'm also not someone that needs to make a complete living off my artwork. I would like to make more money off my artwork, but I would personally like to continue working on... I would prefer to work on my books. I could make money with my art other ways, but I only have so much time in the day, and I would rather work on my books and work on illustrations for Ascension Epoch and that sort of thing. So I more so find things like teaching a distraction. But and likewise, if you want to teach classes, a lot of art stores train you. Like we'll say Michael's. Michael's offers classes in painting. Michael's will train you in how to paint and then let you teach there. And they want you to teach a specific way, so that's why they'll train you. I mean, they want you to be able to paint going in, but you'll learn how to paint their particular way. So there's that too. Oh, and if you do it through like a community gallery or something with a classroom, you'll have the opportunity to talk about your own stuff afterwards. At Michael's, you're not necessarily supposed to talk about like your own books or anything like that. And you wouldn't be doing comic book style artwork unless Michael's has changed their programs and what they teach. Let's see, we did comic stores, small bookstores. Small bookstores, you can also talk to the owners and see if they'd be interested in letting you talk. At bookstores, people will probably be more interested in the writing aspect of comics than the art. But hey, you're writing, so go for it. And then small bookstores, galleries. Oh, and then the other thing is small local art groups. Like in my area, there's a... Oh, before I get to that, I was just going to say that personally I found with the local art center that between having to work 3 Saturdays and essentially be between having to work 3 Saturdays for them and paying, I can't remember if it was $50 or $100 to join for the year. And there were issues like what was it? Let me see if I have a copy of Copper Knights and Granite Men here. I do not. Copper Knights and Granite Men, Kamistra has an aerosol spray gun. No, I can't remember if it was Kamistra or Hecate that didn't get in. Hecate has like a Western steampunk look to her, even though she's a modern character and she was holding two pistols, or if it was the cover for Copper Knights and Granite Men with Camistra having her aerosol spray gun. But I remember I wasn't allowed to put one of them in a gallery at Washington, D.C. Because they had a gun. And I thought it was really funny because the display before this was the display before that was drones. And it's like, you know, drones are way more dangerous than a pistol, especially when the army uses them. But, you know, whatever. You're at the mercy of other people's opinions on those sorts of things. So yeah, depending on what kind of comic art you do, that's also not that's also going to be a factor in whether these places allow you to have your stuff there, display your work or not, or talk about your work. But I personally found that because this art center would also do shows not shows, events every once in a while. Like they'd have a Christmas mart during their open house Saturdays, and spring, we'll say a Christmas mart and a spring spring event where different vendors and crafters and stuff like that could come in. And I personally found that for the price of membership and quite frankly how little you got to display your artwork as a member, and the fact that you could end up working during these essentially sales event opportunities instead of having a table there, because they never included the table there. It was supposed to be more beneficial to you to have your art hanging on the wall occasionally. That it's better for me to actually just pay and get a table at their events. I usually don't sell well there, but I at least get some word out. And I never sold a piece in their gallery when I was a member. Because, you don't put your whole comic book up in a gallery. You're essentially selling one page. So I personally didn't find the membership there to be overly beneficial for me. Okay, next thing, local art groups. Some local art groups have guest artists every month, or whenever they have a meeting, they'll have someone come in and talk to the members, but again, about something that the members are interested in. So if it's like a fine art group, if it's a bunch of painters or something like that, then you may end up just doing something on how to use Photoshop or something. That's what they wanted me. That's what my local art group wanted me to do if I was going to give a speech. So again, you're not necessarily promoting your books, but you're offering something, and you always have to tailor it to be interested to the group that's there. But you can look into that. Finally, if you have a completed comic done, you can go to how to say it. If you have a completed comic done, you can go to colleges, local colleges, smaller ones too, community colleges and the like, and find out who the art professors are there, and art professors or literature professors. Sometimes literature professors get very interested in comics as a medium, and you can talk to them and see if they'd be interested in hosting you. Oh, or some have comic book clubs. You can contact them too. You can talk to the clubs or the professors and see if they'd be interested in having you come to the student, talk to the students, and give a talk on, self-publishing, things like that, or potentially like where you get ideas, or how you draw, or things specific to comics. There's any number of topics, but yeah, local colleges. Sometimes schools can be a little harder though. Like when I say schools, I mean like grade schools or middle schools or high schools. Sometimes they can be a little harder just because they'll look very heavily at your content and this, that, or the other thing, or what you're doing has to fit in the curriculum, all that. But still, it's worth doing. It's worth a shot if you want to talk. Oh, and the other big obvious thing, although you'd still have to pay to go to the convention, so there's a cost involved there, but conventions. If there's a Comic Con in your area, Comic Cons, the big Comic Cons aren't always looking for people to talk, but most Comic Cons, especially the smaller ones, are trying to fill out a roster. They've got so many slots that they have to fill within a certain amount of time. And I can tell you, because I've run a comic book convention, that people often have ideas for have ideas for panels, or can give panels, but just don't actually act on it and get their ideas in. So if there's a small Comic Con near you, then definitely contact them and say, hey, I want a table at your con, and I can also give this panel on this topic that people might be interested in. And yeah, that would be good, because small cons are looking for stuff like that. And then at the end of your talk, which should be informative in some way on a topic that people are interested in, at the end of that, you could say, hey, also I have a book. And hopefully if you gave a good talk, people will be interested in getting your book. So that is all my advice on where you can look into either doing book signings or talking to people about your craft in a way that can help you promote your book. I hope that helped, Nephtalie. Something I forgot to add. When Mike and I do offer to do panels at conventions, we usually do it on mining the public domain and Creative Commons for story ideas. That's obviously something that, other writers and artists would be interested in. Some people don't understand the concept of the public domain or Creative Commons. We go into describing that a little bit in general terms. We give examples, and it's actually a good little informative speech. People that come like it, and then we can talk about how we release our books Creative Commons, and it's just interesting little informational session, but it also ties back to Ascension Epoch, and that's ideally what you want anything that you talk about to do. Okay, I'm going to switch over to doing a recording after the fact on this next video. Like I said, I was sick yesterday and I just kind of wasn't feeling the talking while I was drawing, so I cut it off at one question, but I still was shooting footage, so here we go. All right, so David asks, do I get attached to my drawings? He essentially is asking about a discussion of the nature of the life of fictional characters and their relationship to their creator. That's an interesting question and a huge question. And if I was a more responsible person, I would make a script before going into this one, because it's interesting and it's big and there's a lot to talk about with it. But I'm just going to try to go off the cuff because that's what this month is about. Before I answer that question in terms of characters, though, I want to say that the literal answer to do I get attached to my drawings is yes. And not just because of the characters. I can easily spend 4 or 6 or 8 or 10, or in my lifetime there have been drawings that I've spent 30 hours on. Not lately, thankfully, but in the past, yeah, you pour hours and hours and hours into a drawing, and most people might look at them for 30 seconds, but the drawing itself, the lines on the paper, an incredible thing happens when I look at that physical piece of paper, and all of a sudden lots of things come flooding back to me. When I in the future look at this drawing, I'm going to remember recording these videos. I'm going to remember taking reference photos with Mike and Russ with my son in the room. I can look back. When I was in high school, I had to draw an ear of corn. And the whole point of it was to draw it as detailed as we possibly could, and the paper was huge. I never work on like 30-inch paper. But this was, a huge sheet of Arches watercolor paper, I believe it was, or some really fancy Arches paper. And with just a pencil and drawing corn every day. Well, not every day. I think we had like a month to do it. We had other projects in between. But I can look at that picture of corn, and I remember carrying around that corn stalk, and I remember conversations I had with friends, and I remember, cursing my fate of having to deal with drawing corn and, detailing every kernel on that thing, and the days when it's like I've given up and I've had enough, and I started to half-ass it, and then I regretting that the next day and polishing that part up, and dude, it was a mess. I still remember the way I felt the first time that I drew a comic page that I was really proud of. All these memories are twined up in these drawings, and that's actually, you know, I draw my original characters, and when you're drawing your original characters, people tend to, you know, not care too much about those characters. So there's not exactly high demand for Ascension Epoch art. But even if there was, I would have a hard time selling original drawings, just because that original piece of paper means a lot to me psychically. And because of that, I've always sold my original work for a higher price. And that's a choice. Every artist has that choice. As for, do I get attached to the actual characters? Yes, absolutely. I'm going to have a video coming up on splitting up facets of your personality to give character traits to a whole bunch of people in a story, as opposed to just basing a character off yourself, one character off yourself. And that's coming up. That's not going to be one of these real-time sketch and chats. That's one of my regular scripted videos. Yeah, when you first create a character, you may have a drawing, you may not have a drawing. You have this vague concept of actually a role you might need in a story. And you just sort of haphazardly throw traits at the character to try to create some semblance of a real person, or real enough that, you know, they're interesting to read about. But as you write that character, you know, they really do start to come alive, and you start to know them, and at some point they more or less start writing themselves. And then the hard part about writing isn't what is this character going to do in this situation, or what is this character going to say. The hard part is figuring out what should happen to this character that this character will react to. And that's still a very, very hard thing to deal with. You know, getting hung up on how a fight should go, or, you know, should someone get injured or not get injured, or who should show up when or do what. You know, those are all very, very difficult things that can stall your writing. But it no longer becomes a question of, you know, who is this character and how are they going to react to this. For this particular drawing that I'm doing, it's kind of hard to say. You know, when I'm actively reading the story, I do feel a great deal of empathy for these characters. But this is actually the first story that these particular Ascension Epoch versions of these characters appear in. These are public domain characters, if I haven't already said that. So yeah, there's not a deep history for me in terms of these characters, but I mean, in terms of caring for characters, though, there are, you know, there are certain characters. When Torrent and Ava have their, I don't remember if it's in book 1 or book 2, V-Stend irregulars, but Torrent and Ava have a misunderstanding over something that happens at a Teen Talent Coalition meeting, and you know, I cringe for them. You know, I've been there, I've done that. Ava is Corona. She can generate heat. I've drawn her a bunch of times on this channel. But you know, she's going through that nice, awkward, you know, starting to get independence when you're a teenager, finding yourself, figuring out where you are. You know, she's dealing with her first serious boyfriend, and you know, torrent can be a lot to deal with. So yeah, I feel a lot for her. I asked Mike this question too, and it's funny because Mike said no, he doesn't. He he cares about our characters, yes, but he's never like concerned for them because he said, you know, he's essentially the god in this tiny universe. So he said if anything happens to the characters, it's all according to his plan. So he doesn't, you know, lose sleep over it or anything. But I may have an abundance of empathy because there are characters. There are a lot of characters that Mike and I write together. Then there are some characters that are Mike's characters. I can write them, but Mike has absolute veto power over what happens to those characters. And then there's characters that are my characters, and Mike can write them, but I have absolute veto power over what happens to those characters. For example, Torrent is Mike's character, and there's a character coming up in the East End Regulars books called Threads, and he's my character. But we still end up writing things that end up happening to other characters. So, you know, you really feel for some of these characters. There's a Mike and I have written so many stories that you know, we're trying to release them chronologically and stuff like that. So, you know, if we have 6 books out, we probably have you know, 30 books in some stage of writing. I remember there was one instance where Threads' mom and Meryl are making fun of Threads for some reason, and his mom says something really, really stabbing at Threads, and I remember like telling Mike, you can't have her say this. Like his mom can't be that mean to him. Because you get protective of these characters, and there's characters that like Atomic Ranger is a joint character for me and Mike. Mike created him. Mike created him, and you know, I filled out his character. So, you know, he's a joint character, but he's been handed a lot of really unfortunate situations in his life. His hand of cards really, really rots. And you know, there's nothing to be done about it. That's his origin. So, you know, I feel a great deal of empathy when writing any kind of personal scenes with that particular character. And, you know, Mike and I throw out ideas all the time. Never know if we're going to use them or not. But yeah, I get worried about characters when, you know, if you read Copper Knights and Granite Men, you know what the Dexter Medusa is, and it has nothing to do with turning people to stone. But you know, sometimes Mike will hypothetically throw something out there like, do you think the Dexter Medusa would work on Atomic Ranger? And you know, you cringe a little and you're like, oh, I don't want anything, you know, I don't want anything like that to happen to our characters. It's like, I really like that character. You know, Mike and I often have debates, and it's like, you know, how do we feel about characters dying and stuff like that. So yeah, you you definitely, I don't know, you can fall in love with your characters. They could mean a heck of a lot to you, or at least I think they can. It's worth noting too that like how you feel about your characters really can change as you change. Like Bulwark from Copper Knights and Granite Men. Uh, you know, we joke that he's the thing. Uh, if you took away the thing's angst. Um, but another big difference is that Bulwark has a family before he gets into superheroing. You know, he has, I think, his daughter Molly is 10. You know, he has a wife and all that. And he's a workaday Johnny that falls into a gig with the Challenger Foundation, which, you know, completely changes his income level and is a big step up for his family. And it's one of those things where it's like, oh, well, you know, that job's really dangerous. It's like, I don't care. You know, I can, you know, send my kid to a better school and all that jazz. You know, and we wrote this character before we had a kid. And, you know, after you have a kid, you start like really thinking about this character's mindset. And there's a book coming up with Bulwark in it where, you know, he has to face the fact that he's not even face the fact. He has to come to terms with and reconcile with the fact that he's walked into this really dangerous job and he's going to go into really dangerous situations. And, you know, he has to question what he's doing it for. It's like, is he just doing it for the paycheck, or is he doing something right or bettering the world? And it makes you stop and think about yourself and what you're doing for future generations then as a parent too. And I think I was pregnant when Mike started writing some of the scenes for that book. I don't think I was when the premise came out. And I've actually written some scenes for that book too. Yeah, like your relationship with your characters change as your life changes too. I've been known to say when I was a really little kid, when I was like, you know, 4 and 5 years old, Michelangelo was my favorite Ninja Turtle. But as I grew up, my favorite Ninja Turtle would bounce around from, you know, Donatello and Raphael and all that. And then at some point I was uh, watching the 2000 series of Ninja Turtles and, you know, reading the comics and getting into it. And I think I was in my mid-20s about, and you know, it dawned on me that it's like, I really like Leonardo. Then you'd stop and you say, when did that happen? And now if you ask me my favorite Ninja Turtle, I don't know the answer. Or it depends on that day. So yeah, like, that can happen with your own characters if you put enough time and investment and care into creating them and writing them and, you know, really let them guide their own stories. Okay, folks, I don't want to get too hung up on dubbing over something I've already drawn. I actually want to get to drawing for today. So I'm going to just speed up the footage and post this. Just so you folks know, I do books. You can check them out on Amazon.com or learn more about them at ascensionepoch.com, all one word, no spaces. And let me know how you folks are doing on your Inktober below. You can also ask questions in the comments, of course. I'll add them to the queue of things to try to talk about. And have an awesome day, folks. Presto, over and out. I'm obviously rushing today, folks, so for the after credits teaser, you're just going to have to settle for a one-eyed cat on a surfboard. Have an awesome day, folks. Presto, over and out.
Farewell and adieu to you, fair Spanish ladies. Farewell and adieu to you, ladies of Spain.